The snow was already sticking to my hair when my father opened the door, took one look at me and my 2-day-old son, and decided the cold was more welcome than we were. I remember the exact sound it made when the door shut again, a hollow, final thud, like the house itself had exhaled me. I was still bleeding from childbirth, my stitches pulling with every breath, my baby pressed against my chest so tightly I could feel his tiny heart racing. The wind screamed across the porch, sharp and merciless, and in that moment I understood something brutal. Some families don't break you because they're strong. They break you because they've trained you your whole life to believe you don't get to fight back. When my father's eyes slid past my son as if he were nothing, when his new wife's silhouette hovered behind him without a word, I realized this wasn't anger or shock or stress. This was punishment. And what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine as he chose the snow over his own blood, was that within 24 hours everything he believed about power, control, and survival would begin to collapse. The night didn't start with shouting, it never does. It started with hope, thin and stupid, but hope all the same. I had taken a rideshare from the hospital, my body aching, my head foggy from exhaustion and hormones, my son bundled in a blanket the nurse had tucked around him with a smile and a whispered good luck. I told myself it was temporary, just a few nights at my father's place until I could figure something out. I didn't expect love. I didn't expect congratulations. I didn't even expect kindness. I just expected shelter. The driver dropped me at the curb and pulled away before I could change my mind. Snow had begun falling harder, thick white flakes swirling under the porch light. The house looked the same as it always had. White siding, dark shutters. A place that had never really felt like home but had always been framed as my only option. I climbed the steps slowly, every movement sending a sharp reminder through my abdomen that my body was still healing. My son made a soft sound, not quite a cry, more like a question, and I adjusted my hold, whispering to him that Mommy was here. I knocked once. Then again. I hoped my father's new wife might answer instead. She was barely 10 years older than me, polished and careful with her words, the kind of woman who smiled while calculating what something was worth. If nothing else, she liked appearances. The door opened and it was my father. He stood there with his arms crossed, his face already set in disappointment, as if he had been rehearsing this moment all day. "You came back," he said. Not surprised, not relieved, just irritated. "I just need a place to stay for a couple of nights," I said softly. My voice sounded wrong to my own ears, thin and shaky. "I just had the baby. I'm not well yet. Please." His eyes dropped to my son for half a second, then lifted again, hardening. "You made your choices," he said. "You left. Don't come back expecting us to clean up after you." "I'm not asking you to raise him," I said quickly. "I just need somewhere safe. One night." Behind him, from somewhere deeper in the house, I heard the clink of ice in a glass and the low murmur of the television. A moment later, his wife appeared at his shoulder, wrapped in a silk robe, her expression curious rather than concerned. "Oh," she said lightly. "So this is it." My father didn't move to let me inside. "We talked about this," he said, his voice sharp. "You were supposed to handle this properly." My stomach twisted. "Handle what?" She smiled then, a small knowing smile that made my skin prickle. "The plan," she said. "Temporary custody, just until you recovered. It would have been easier for everyone." "I'm not signing anything," I said. The words came out clearer than I felt. "I didn't agree to that." My father's jaw tightened. "You never do anything the easy way." My son shifted in my arms, his face scrunching as he began to cry, a thin, fragile sound that cut straight through me. I rocked him gently, my heart pounding. "Please," I said again. "He's cold. I'm still bleeding. I can barely stand." My father stepped fully onto the porch. His wife followed, closing the distance between us. The cold rushed in, biting harder now that the door was open. "This is your fault," my father said. "You came back when you shouldn't have." "What did I do?" I asked, stunned. You exist, his wife said calmly. You complicate things. The snow stung my face, melting into my hair and collar. My arms were shaking from holding my son so tightly. Dad, I whispered, please don't do this. He reached for the baby. Give him to me. I stepped back instinctively. No. His eyes narrowed. If you won't cooperate, you can't stay here. The word cooperate sent a cold understanding through me. This wasn't about concern. This wasn't about family. This was about control, about erasing a problem. You always play the victim, his wife said, her tone bored. Honestly, that baby probably deserves better. Something inside me cracked, quietly and completely. Years of trying, years of shrinking myself, of apologizing for things that weren't my fault, of believing I could earn my place if I just endured a little more. Standing there in the snow with my newborn trembling against my chest, I finally understood there had never been a place for me. You need to leave, my father said. Now. I have nowhere to go, I said. My voice was barely a breath. He stepped forward and shoved me. Not hard enough to mean harm, maybe, but enough. My legs, weak from surgery and exhaustion, buckled. I stumbled back into the railing, pain exploding across my abdomen as I fought to stay upright. My son screamed. Another shove, harder this time. I went down, the porch boards slamming into my shoulder, snow soaking through my clothes instantly. My vision blurred as pain flared hot and bright. Stop, I cried, please. My father reached for the door. When you're ready to cooperate, he said coldly, maybe we'll talk. He's 2 days old, I screamed. He'll freeze. Not my responsibility, he said, and shut the door. The lock clicked. The world went quiet except for the wind and my son's desperate cries. I curled around him as best I could, shielding his tiny body with mine, praying my warmth would be enough. The cold seeped in fast, stealing my breath, burning my skin. My hands went numb. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw ached. I rocked him, whispered to him, promised him things I wasn't sure I could keep. Mommy's here, I said over and over. Stay with me, please. The sky seemed impossibly wide above me, the snow falling heavier now, muffling everything. My son's cries weakened, each one softer than the last, and panic surged through me like a physical force. This can't be how it ends, I thought. Not like this, not because of them. Headlights cut through the storm. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Then I heard doors slam, voices shouting, boots crunching across snow. Strong hands lifted my son from my arms, wrapping him in something warm. And another set of hands steadied me. An oxygen mask pressed gently over my face. Ma'am, can you hear me? Someone asked. I tried to speak, but everything tilted, light and warmth swallowing the cold. Just before consciousness slipped away, I heard a man say, We've got her. Get them out of here. As the darkness closed in, one impossible thought surfaced, faint but insistent. My father had believed he was throwing away a burden. He had no idea he had just created a threat. The first thing I felt was warmth, not gentle warmth, but the sharp, almost painful kind that rushed back into my body all at once, making my skin sting as if it were waking from a long, brutal sleep. I gasped, my lungs burning, my chest heaving as I sucked in air that didn't scrape like ice. For a moment I didn't know where I was. The wind was gone, the snow was gone, the porch was gone. Instead, there was a low hum, steady and mechanical, and a soft amber light glowing above me. My head turned instinctively, panic flaring before I was fully awake. My baby, I croaked, my throat dry and raw, the words barely forming. He's right here, a woman said immediately, her voice calm and firm, the kind of voice that doesn't panic because it knows exactly what it's doing. She stepped into my line of sight wearing navy scrubs, her hair pulled back neatly, her expression professional but kind. He's safe. You're safe. Safe. The word felt foreign, like a language I didn't speak anymore. I tried to sit up, a sharp pain tearing through my abdomen as my body protested. I cried out despite myself, my hand flying to my stomach. "Easy," she said, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "You had hypothermia, and your incision reopened. You lost a lot of blood. But you're stable now." My eyes searched the room until they landed on a clear bassinet beside the bed. Inside, wrapped in thick cream-colored blankets, was my son. His tiny chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. His lips were pink again, his skin no longer that terrifying shade of pale blue I had seen on the porch. Tears blurred my vision as a sob tore free from somewhere deep in my chest. I reached out with trembling fingers, touching the glass as if I needed proof he was real, that we were both still here. "He had mild hypothermia," the nurse continued gently. "But he responded very well to warming. He's a strong little guy." Strong. The word lodged in my heart, heavy and fragile at the same time. "Where am I?" I whispered, finally noticing the room itself. This wasn't a regular hospital room. The bed was wide and soft, the sheets high quality. The walls weren't sterile white but a warm neutral tone, accented with subtle lighting and quiet machines tucked discreetly into the corners. "You're in a private medical suite," she said. "Everything you need is taken care of." Before I could ask anything else, the door opened quietly. A man stepped inside, and the energy of the room shifted instantly. He wasn't wearing scrubs or a lab coat. He wore a dark tailored suit, his posture straight, his silver hair neatly combed back. There was an air of calm authority about him that made the nurse step aside without a word. "You're awake," he said, relief softening his otherwise serious expression. "That's good." I stared at him, my mind struggling to place him. "Who are you?" "My name is Nathaniel Cole," he said. "I'm an attorney." An attorney. The word sent a ripple of unease through me. "Why is an attorney here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a chair closer to my bed and sat down, making sure he was at eye level with me, not looming, not rushed. "Before we talk about anything else," he said, "I want you to know that you are not in any trouble. No one here expects anything from you. You and your son are protected." Protected. Another word that didn't fit the world I had come from. "How did you find us?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my effort to keep it steady. Nathaniel glanced briefly at my wrist. "You were wearing a bracelet," he said. "An old one." My heart skipped. I remembered it then, dimly. A thin silver bracelet my mother had given me when I was a teenager. I had worn it every day until it snapped when I fell on the porch. I looked down at my bare wrist now, panic flaring again. "It broke," I said. "I lost it." "We recovered it," he replied calmly. It triggered an alert. An alert. My mind reeled. How could it do that? "Because it was designed to," he said, "years ago." I shook my head slowly. "That doesn't make any sense." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I'm here." The nurse excused herself, giving us privacy, and suddenly the room felt very still. My son shifted in his bassinet, making a soft sound, and I reached out instinctively, resting my hand against the glass again. "You said you're an attorney," I said. "Whose attorney?" Nathaniel took a slow breath. "Your grandfather's." The word hit me like a physical blow. I don't have a grandfather. That was what I had always been told. My mother had no family. No one wanted her. She had come from nothing, and when she died, there was nothing left. Nathaniel's gaze held mine, steady and unflinching. "You were told that," he said, "but it isn't true." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. "You're mistaken." "I'm not," he said. "Your mother was the daughter of a man named Edward Hale." The name meant nothing to me, and yet something in my chest tightened painfully. "He spent the last 15 years trying to find you," Nathaniel continued. "He never stopped looking." I swallowed hard. "Then why didn't he?" "He tried," Nathaniel said. "Letters were sent. Calls were made. Every attempt was blocked. My mind raced. By who? Your father, he said simply. The room seemed to tilt. That's not possible. It is, Nathaniel said. We have documentation, returned mail, legal notices, requests for no further contact. I thought of my father's insistence on handling all paperwork, his anger whenever I asked about my mother's side of the family, the way he always shut those conversations down with the same words. There's nothing there. Why would he do that? I whispered. Nathaniel hesitated, then answered honestly. Because your grandfather's estate is substantial, and because he made it clear that his daughter's child would inherit everything. Everything. The word echoed hollowly. I don't understand, I said. I barely survived last night. None of this feels real. It doesn't have to yet, Nathaniel said. You don't need to make sense of it today. A sharp, unfamiliar grief welled up inside me. If he was looking for me, I said, why did you come now? Nathaniel's expression changed, something like sadness crossing his features. Because your grandfather passed away last night. The words stole the air from my lungs. No, I whispered. No, that can't be. He had a heart condition, Nathaniel said gently. His doctors warned him about stress, but he insisted on finalizing everything. Everything. Again. He knew we were close, Nathaniel continued. He knew we had located you. He wanted to meet you in person. Tears slid down my temples into my hair, silent and unstoppable. I had spent my whole life believing no one was looking for me, that I was unwanted, disposable. And now I was being told that someone had searched for me, loved me from a distance, and died just hours before reaching me. I never even knew him, I whispered. He knew you, Nathaniel said. Enough to make sure you were protected. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it carefully on the bedside table. This is for you, he said. From him. I stared at it, my name written across the front in strong, deliberate handwriting. My fingers hovered over it, afraid that opening it would make everything real. What happens now? I asked. For now, Nathaniel said, you rest, you heal, and when you're ready, we'll talk about what comes next. I nodded slowly, overwhelmed, my gaze drifting back to my son. He stirred again, his tiny hand curling into a fist, as if grasping at the world. Nathaniel stood. There's one more thing you should know, he said. Your father and his wife have no idea you survived the storm. A strange, cold calm settled over me. They also have no idea, he continued, who you are. As he left the room, I leaned back against the pillows, one hand resting over my heart, the other still touching the glass of the bassinet. Somewhere between the warmth of the room and the steady breathing of my son, a truth began to take shape. The woman they threw into the snow wasn't gone. She was waking up. Morning came quietly, the kind of morning that feels almost disrespectful after a night like the one I'd survived. Pale light filtered through the tall windows of the private suite, touching the edge of the bed, the smooth floor, the machines that hummed softly as if nothing extraordinary had happened. My son slept peacefully in the bassinet beside me, his tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm so steady it felt like a miracle. For a long moment I simply watched him, afraid that if I moved too quickly, the calm would shatter. Then my eyes drifted to the envelope on the bedside table. My name was still there, written in ink that hadn't faded, bold and deliberate, as if whoever had written it expected me to read it eventually. I hadn't touched it since Nathaniel placed it there the night before. I hadn't slept much either. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the door slam again, felt the cold bite into my skin, saw my father's face as he turned away. Some truths don't hurt because they're painful. They hurt because they change everything. I reached for the envelope with trembling fingers, then stopped. My hand hovered in the air, my chest tightening. If I opened it, There would be no going back to the life I thought I had. The story I'd been told about who I was, where I came from, and why I never quite belonged would finally collapse. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Nathaniel entered quietly, carrying a slim leather folder under his arm. He glanced first at my son, then back at me. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Sore," I said honestly. "Confused." He gave a small nod, as if that was exactly the answer he expected. "That's fair." He pulled a chair closer and sat, unhurried. There was something grounding about the way he moved, as if he had no intention of rushing me through the most fragile moment of my life. "You don't have to open it yet," he said, following my gaze to the envelope. "Nothing in there is time-sensitive." "Then why does it feel like it is?" I asked quietly. "Because it represents a choice," he said. "And choices change trajectories." I swallowed. "Before I open it, I need to know something. Ask, why are you really here?" My voice didn't waver this time. "Not just as an attorney. Why did you come yourself?" Nathaniel studied me for a moment, then answered with careful honesty. "Because your grandfather didn't trust just anyone with this. He wanted someone who would treat you like a person, not an asset." That word landed heavily. Asset. "You keep saying my grandfather," I said, "but I don't even know his name." "Edward Hale," Nathaniel replied. "He was meticulous and very private." I nodded slowly. "Tell me about my mother." The question seemed to surprise him, just slightly. He leaned back in his chair, choosing his words. "She was intelligent," he said. "Strong-willed. She challenged him constantly. When she left home, it wasn't because she was disowned. It was because she refused to live by terms that felt like control." A bitter, familiar ache spread through my chest. "That sounds familiar." "She disappeared deliberately," Nathaniel continued, "changed her name, cut off contact. Your grandfather spent years trying to find her, but she didn't want to be found." "And when she died?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "We didn't know. Not until much later. By then you were already living under your father's roof." The pieces began to slide into place, clicking together with a sickening clarity. My father's insistence that my mother had no family. His rage whenever I asked questions. The way he positioned himself as my only lifeline. "You said he blocked contact," I said. "How?" Nathaniel opened the folder in his lap and slid a single document toward me. It was a copy of a formal notice, years old, requesting all communication from the Hale estate to cease. My father's signature was at the bottom. My stomach dropped. "He told us you didn't want contact," Nathaniel said gently. "That you were unstable. That it would be harmful to disturb you." Unstable. The word echoed sharply, a word my father had used my entire life whenever I disagreed with him. "He lied," I whispered. "Yes." I closed my eyes briefly, my hand curling into the sheets. So why now? Why did he suddenly want me gone? Nathaniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the folder again and pulled out a different document. Financial statements, corporate filings, numbers that meant nothing to me yet, but the tension in his jaw told me they mattered. "Your father's business is failing," he said. "Rapidly." I opened my eyes. "Failing?" "He's over-leveraged," Nathaniel explained. "Debt, missed payments. A partnership he was counting on fell through. And recently he entered discussions with a firm that could potentially save him." Something cold settled in my chest. "What does that have to do with me?" Nathaniel met my gaze squarely. "That firm has strict due diligence requirements. No unresolved legal risks. No family disputes that could become liabilities." Understanding crept in, slow and horrifying. "My son and I were a risk." "Yes." "And the custody paperwork his wife mentioned," I said, my voice barely steady. "That wasn't about helping me recover." "No," Nathaniel said quietly. "It was about control, about eliminating uncertainty." I let out a short, humorless laugh that tasted like grief. So he didn't throw me out because of his new wife. He threw you out because of fear, Nathaniel said. She just gave him permission. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in as memories resurfaced with new meaning. The way my father always insisted on holding my documents, the way he discouraged independence, the subtle threats disguised as concern. I need to open the letter, I said. Nathaniel nodded and stood, giving me space. My fingers shook as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. I unfolded it slowly, my eyes scanning the words, then stopping as emotion surged unexpectedly hard. My granddaughter, if you are reading this, then I failed to reach you in time. For that, I am deeply sorry. I want you to know that I tried. I searched for you longer than I searched for anything else in my life, and finding you mattered more to me than any fortune or legacy I built. Tears blurred the ink. You were kept from me, not because you were unwanted, but because someone else wanted control. I hope one day you understand that your absence was never your fault. I pressed my hand to my mouth, stifling a sob. I leave you what should have been your mother's. Not as compensation, but as restoration. You come from strength, even if you were never told. Whatever you choose to do with what I've left you, do it knowing you were always meant for more than survival. With love I should have given sooner, Edward. The paper trembled in my hands as I folded it back up. For the first time since the storm, my tears weren't from pain or fear. They were from something else entirely. Grief for a man I never met, and relief that I hadn't imagined my worth after all. He knew, I whispered. Yes, Nathaniel said softly. And he trusted you. I looked at my son again, at the way his fingers twitched in his sleep, at the life I had nearly lost to my father's calculation. What happens if I do nothing? I asked. Nathaniel considered the question carefully. Then the estate still transfers. Protections remain in place. But your father's situation will deteriorate quickly. And if I act? A faint, knowing look crossed his face. Then you change the board entirely. Silence settled between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. I need time, I said. Of course, he replied. But there is something else you should be aware of. I looked up. The firm your father is negotiating with, Nathaniel said. They believe they're dealing with an anonymous executive team. My pulse quickened. Meaning? They don't know who holds final authority, he said. And they certainly don't know it's you. A strange calm spread through me, different from the numbness I'd felt before. This was clarity, sharp and steady. When will I find out more? I asked. Nathaniel gathered his folder and stood. Tomorrow, he said. That's when the next phase begins. He paused at the door, then added, and for what it's worth, you survived something most people wouldn't. That wasn't luck. After he left, I leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion finally settling into my bones. I reached over and gently touched the glass of the bassinet again, my son's warmth radiating through it. They tried to erase us, I whispered to him. But they failed. Outside, the light grew brighter, the world moving forward as it always did. And for the first time, I wasn't bracing for what might be taken from me next. I was preparing for what I would no longer allow. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I drifted in and out of shallow rest, my mind replaying the same fragments over and over like a broken reel. The sound of the lock clicking. The weight of my son against my chest. My father's voice, flat and final. By the time the sky outside the tall windows began to lighten, I had accepted one undeniable truth. Whatever life I thought I had before the snow was gone. And whatever came next would not be built on hope or forgiveness, but on understanding. The room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of the machines and my son's soft breathing. I watched him sleep, his tiny mouth parting slightly, his brow smooth and untroubled. He had no idea how close he had come to disappearing from the world before he even had a chance to know it. I reached into the bassinet and let my finger rest in his small palm. He curled his fingers around it instinctively, trusting, unaware. "I won't let them touch you again," I whispered. When the knock came, it didn't startle me. I had been expecting it. Nathaniel entered carrying a thicker folder this time, his expression composed but serious. He closed the door behind him carefully, as if sealing us off from whatever chaos might exist beyond these walls. "You didn't rest," he said, not as an accusation, but as an observation. "I couldn't," I replied. "My mind wouldn't stop." He nodded. "Then perhaps it's time to give it something concrete." He placed the folder on the table near my bed but didn't open it right away. Instead, he sat down and folded his hands. "I want to ask you something before we go any further," he said. "Do you want the truth, or do you want the reason?" I frowned. "Aren't they the same?" "Not always," he said quietly. I thought about my father's face in the doorway, the calculation behind his eyes. "I want both." Nathaniel opened the folder. Inside were documents that felt heavier than paper should. Financial reports, legal correspondence, charts filled with figures and timelines. He slid the first page toward me. "This is your father's company," he said. "At least what's left of it." I stared at the numbers, not fully understanding them, but sensing the story they told. "It looks bad." "It is," Nathaniel confirmed. "He's been bleeding money for over a year, quietly, covering losses with short-term fixes, loans stacked on loans." "Why didn't anyone stop him?" "They tried," Nathaniel said. "Partners pulled out, advisors warned him. But he made one critical assumption." "What assumption?" "That something would save him at the last minute." I looked up. "What something?" Nathaniel hesitated for a fraction of a second. "A deal." He flipped to another document. This one was a summary, shorter, more focused. My eyes caught on certain words even before he spoke. Strategic partnership, confidential negotiations, due diligence. "He's been courting a firm with the resources to absorb his debt and stabilize his operations," Nathaniel said. "It's his last chance." "And did he get it?" I asked. "Not yet," he said. "They're cautious, thorough, they don't rush into anything." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What do they want?" "Clean lines," Nathaniel replied. "No unresolved legal risks, no family disputes, no potential claims." My chest tightened. "Claims like me." "Yes," he said without hesitation, "and your son." The room felt suddenly smaller. "So that's why," I whispered. "That's why he wanted me to sign those papers." "Yes, and his wife," I added, the memory of her calm smile flashing through my mind. She knew. Nathaniel leaned back slightly. "She knew enough. She's been pushing him toward aggressive solutions." I let out a bitter breath. "She married him for security." "And control," Nathaniel said. "She's very concerned with appearances, a perfect family image, a narrative that sells stability." "And a newborn grandchild from an unstable daughter doesn't fit," I said. "No," he agreed. "It complicates things." I thought of the way my father had looked at my son, not with curiosity or affection, but with irritation, as if he were an inconvenience. "He didn't throw me out because of her," I said slowly. "He threw me out because he panicked." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "Fear makes people cruel, especially when they believe cruelty will solve their problems." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of that sink in. "You said this firm is careful. What happens now?" "They're still evaluating," Nathaniel said, "but the events of the last 24 hours have not gone unnoticed." My eyes snapped open. "They know?" "They know there was an incident," he clarified. "They know there may be legal exposure, and they know your father has not been entirely forthcoming." A flicker of something unfamiliar sparked in my chest. Not anger, not fear, something steadier. "What else are they looking at?" I asked. Nathaniel studied me for a moment, then answered. They're looking at lineage, at succession, at who actually holds power behind the scenes. I frowned. I don't understand. You will, he said gently. Soon. He stood and moved to the window, glancing out at the city below. There's something else you should know about your father's situation, he said. The timing of his marriage wasn't accidental. I laughed softly, humorless. Of course it wasn't. He needed to present stability, Nathaniel continued. A wife, a household, someone who looked polished and compliant. And I didn't, I said. No, he said. You represented uncertainty, a connection he couldn't control anymore. I felt a strange clarity settle over me, sharp and cold. He didn't raise me out of love, I said quietly. He raised me because he was guarding something. Yes, Nathaniel said. He kept you. The words echoed painfully, kept, like an object, like leverage. I thought back to every time my father had insisted on handling my paperwork, every time he dismissed my questions about my mother, every time he reminded me how much I owed him. You're protected now, Nathaniel said, turning back toward me. Legally, physically, financially. For how long? I asked. For as long as you need, he replied. But there will come a point when you'll have to decide how visible you want to be. I looked at my son again, his face peaceful. What happens if I stay invisible? Nathaniel considered that. Your father's deal will likely fail. His business will collapse under its own weight, and he'll never know why. And if I don't? I asked. Then you enter the conversation, he said. On your terms. The idea settled into me slowly, unsettling but oddly empowering. He thinks I'm gone, I said. He thinks I'm weak. Yes. And his partners think they're negotiating with someone else entirely. Nathaniel's mouth curved slightly. Correct. I leaned back, exhaustion washing over me in waves. I don't want revenge, I said quietly. I just want him to stop being able to hurt us. Nathaniel nodded. Power doesn't have to be loud to be effective. He closed the folder and placed it carefully back on the table. There's one more connection you should be aware of, he said. The firm your father is pursuing has a very particular requirement. What is it? I asked. They insist on knowing exactly who they're dealing with, he said. Eventually. And when is eventually? I asked. Sooner than your father expects, Nathaniel replied. He gathered his things and stood. Rest today, he said. Heal. Tomorrow will require clarity. After he left, I lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. The pieces were finally aligning, forming a picture I had never been allowed to see. My father hadn't been my protector. He had been my gatekeeper. And the gate was no longer his to control. I reached into the bassinet and gently brushed my son's cheek. He stirred, then settled again, trusting the world in a way I never had. They think we're liabilities, I whispered, but they don't see the whole picture. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet shift taking place behind these walls. Somewhere my father was likely rehearsing his next excuse, his next manipulation, convinced he was still in control. He had no idea that the very thing he tried to erase was about to become the reason everything he built would begin to fall. The first time I stepped into the executive training wing, I felt like an imposter wearing someone else's future. The space was quiet in a deliberate way, not empty, but focused. Glass walls muted the outside world. Screens glowed with market data, financial models, and global timelines that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. This wasn't a hospital room. This wasn't a shelter from the storm. This was where decisions were made, decisions that shaped lives far beyond mine. My son slept against my chest in a soft carrier, his weight grounding me. I could feel his breath through the fabric, steady and warm, a reminder that everything I was about to learn wasn't abstract. It was for him. Nathaniel walked beside me, unhurried, as if this was the most natural place in the world for us to be. We'll start slow, he said. Not because you aren't capable, but because rushing creates cracks. I've lived my whole life in cracks, I replied quietly. He glanced at me, something like respect flickering across his face. Then you already understand more than you think. We entered a conference room smaller than the others, but no less imposing. A long table sat at the center, surrounded by screens and neatly stacked folders. A woman stood when we entered, tall, composed, silver-streaked hair pulled back with precision. This is Elaine Brooks, Nathaniel said, Chief Operating Advisor. Elaine's eyes softened when she noticed my son. You brought him. I don't leave him, I said simply. Good, she replied. Neither did your grandfather when it mattered. The words caught me off guard. I swallowed and took a seat, adjusting the carrier slightly as my son shifted. Elaine tapped a control panel, and one of the screens lit up with a company overview. We're not here to turn you into someone else, she began. We're here to give language and structure to instincts you've already been using to survive. Survive. That word again. It followed me everywhere, as if it were my true title. She walked us through the basics at first. Corporate structure, decision hierarchies, accountability chains. Normally, this kind of information would have blurred together, but I found myself absorbing it with startling clarity. Each concept felt like a name being given to something I had already done in smaller, quieter ways. Crisis management. I knew that. Resource allocation. I had stretched groceries for a week when they were meant to last 3 days. Risk assessment. I had learned to read my father's moods before he even spoke. Elaine paused midway through, studying me. You're not asking many questions. I'm listening, I said. She smiled faintly. That's usually the difference between people who want power and people who understand responsibility. The session lasted hours, broken only by a nurse quietly checking on my son and whispering reassurance when he stirred. By the time we finished, my head ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that comes from muscles being used after too long in disuse. Nathaniel walked me back to the residence wing afterward. You did well, he said. I didn't say anything, I replied. You didn't need to, he said. You saw the patterns. I nodded slowly. Patterns don't lie. People do. That evening, while my son nursed and drifted back to sleep, I sat by the window and let the city lights wash over me. Somewhere out there, my father was likely pacing, calculating his next move. He had always believed information was power, but he had never understood comprehension. The next morning, the pressure arrived. It came not as a confrontation, but as a message. Nathaniel handed me his tablet over breakfast, his expression unreadable. They reached out again, he said. Who? I asked, though I already knew. Your father's legal counsel, indirectly. I stared at the screen. It was a carefully worded email, all polite concern and thinly veiled urgency. A request for clarification, an offer to resolve misunderstandings. The word family appeared no fewer than 4 times. He wants to negotiate, I said flatly. He wants to survive, Nathaniel corrected. I scrolled further. Attached was a proposal, not formal, not yet, just enough to test the waters. He's offering concessions, Nathaniel said. He thinks you're still desperate. I laughed softly, the sound surprising even me. He doesn't know anything about me anymore. No, Nathaniel agreed, and that's dangerous for him. I handed the tablet back. Don't respond. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. You're sure? Let him wait, I said. Let him feel what it's like not to know. That afternoon, Elaine returned with a new focus. Today we talk about leverage, she said. The word sent a chill through me. Leverage isn't about cruelty, she continued, as if reading my thoughts. It's about understanding where systems are fragile and deciding whether to reinforce them or let them collapse. She displayed a flowchart outlining my father's company. I recognized the name instantly. Seeing it dissected so clinically felt surreal. He's overextended, Elaine said, emotionally and financially. He always has been, I murmured. Elaine glanced at me. Personal insight is useful, but we'll ground this in facts. She highlighted debt ratios, missed obligations, partnerships on the verge of dissolving. This is a man who built his identity on control, she said. Take that away and everything unravels. My son stirred, sensing the tension in my body. I rested a hand over his back, breathing through it. He tried to take my child, I said quietly. That wasn't business. No, Elaine said. That was desperation. The session ended with a simple question. If you were in his position, Elaine asked, what would you do next? I didn't answer immediately. I thought of the porch, the snow, the sound of the door locking. I would look for someone weaker than me, I said. Someone I thought I could still control. Elaine nodded slowly. Exactly. That night I received a call I hadn't expected. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Grace? My father's voice said, strained and too careful. Thank God, I've been trying to reach you. I said nothing. I know things went wrong, he continued quickly, but we're family. We can fix this. The word fix made my jaw tighten. Your son, he added. He deserves stability, a real home. I closed my eyes, picturing my son's tiny fingers curling around mine. He has one, I said. A pause. Where are you? My father asked. Safe, I replied. That's not an answer, he snapped, frustration slipping through. It's the only one you're getting, I said. His voice hardened. You think you can just disappear? You think you can punish us? This isn't punishment, I said calmly. It's distance. You're making a mistake, he warned. You don't understand what you're up against. I almost smiled. Neither do you. I ended the call before he could respond. My hands were steady. That surprised me most of all. Nathaniel found me later, standing by the window again. He called, he said. Yes. And? I didn't give him anything, I replied. Nathaniel nodded. Good. That night, as I rocked my son to sleep, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, not yet, but certainty. My father believed power was loud, forceful, immediate. He had never learned the strength of restraint. He had thrown me into the snow believing it would erase me. Instead, it stripped away the last illusion I had about him. As my son drifted into sleep, his breath warm against my chest, I whispered the truth I was finally ready to accept. They don't know who I am anymore. And for the first time, that wasn't terrifying. It was liberating. The meeting was scheduled without my name on it, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I watched from the adjacent observation room as my father stepped into the glass-walled conference space below, his posture stiff, his jaw clenched too tightly to pass as confidence. He wore the same navy blazer he always used when he wanted to look respectable, the one he believed made people take him seriously. It didn't hide the desperation in his eyes. Beside him walked his new wife, Meredith. She moved with the practiced ease of someone who had learned how to occupy space without ever belonging to it. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished floor, each step deliberate. She scanned the room with cool appraisal, already calculating exits, advantages, angles. Meredith never entered a space without measuring what it could give her. They took their seats across from Nathaniel, who sat alone at the long table, composed, unreadable. From where I stood behind the tinted glass, holding my son close against my chest, I could see everything. The subtle tightening of my father's fingers around the leather portfolio. The way Meredith leaned in just slightly, whispering something meant to steady him. This was the first time since the snowstorm that I had seen them together like this, stripped of the illusion of authority they wore at home. In this room, they weren't parents or spouses or gatekeepers. They were applicants. Nathaniel began calmly. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Of course, my father replied quickly. We appreciate the opportunity. We've been looking forward to discussing the partnership. Meredith smiled, thin and polished. We believe our values align. Nathaniel inclined his head. That remains to be determined. I felt my son shift slightly, his small body pressing closer to mine. I rested my hand over his back, grounding myself. I wasn't here to react. I was here to observe. Nathaniel slid a folder across the table. Before we move forward, there are concerns we need to address. My father straightened. Concerns? Yes, Nathaniel said. Financial inconsistencies, legal exposure, and unresolved family matters. Meredith's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. Family matters? Yes, Nathaniel continued, specifically a recent incident involving your adult daughter and her newborn child. The air shifted. I saw it in my father's eyes, the flash of alarm quickly masked by indignation. That situation has been exaggerated, he said. She left voluntarily. She's always been unstable. Meredith nodded. We tried to help. She refused reasonable arrangements. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, but it didn't overwhelm me this time. Instead, it clarified everything. Nathaniel remained still. You're saying your daughter chose to leave your home with a 2-day-old infant during a winter storm? My father hesitated. She was emotional. And injured? Nathaniel asked. She claimed to be, Meredith interjected smoothly, but she's always been dramatic. The words hit harder than I expected, not because they hurt, but because they sounded exactly like the ones that had shaped my entire childhood. Hearing them spoken so casually in a corporate setting stripped them of any remaining power. Nathaniel leaned back slightly. You should understand that the firm you're seeking partnership with places significant importance on risk management. Of course, my father said quickly. That's why we're here. Risk, Nathaniel continued, includes reputational risk, legal risk, and moral risk. Meredith's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. We have documentation, Nathaniel said, his voice even, that suggests your account may not be entirely accurate. My father's face flushed. What documentation? That will be discussed internally, Nathaniel replied. For now, understand that the partnership is paused. Paused. The word landed like a blow. You can't just pause it, my father protested. We've invested months into these talks. Months, Nathaniel echoed, while failing to disclose potential liabilities. Meredith leaned forward. With all due respect, this feels like a misunderstanding. Perhaps if we met the decision-maker directly, we could clarify things. I felt my breath catch, just slightly. Nathaniel met her gaze. The decision-maker is fully informed. When will we meet them? She pressed. When and if they decide it's necessary, he said. My father swallowed hard. We're running out of time. Nathaniel closed the folder. That is not our concern. The meeting ended shortly after. My father stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor, frustration leaking through every controlled movement. Meredith placed a hand on his arm, whispering urgently as they exited the room. I remained where I was long after the door closed, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. A woman holding a baby, a woman unseen. Nathaniel joined me moments later. You handled that well. I didn't do anything, I said quietly. You chose not to, he replied. That matters. I exhaled slowly. They blamed me without hesitation. They always will, Nathaniel said, because accountability would require self-reflection. That evening, the retaliation began. It started with messages. Not directly to me, but to people around me. Nathaniel intercepted most of them. Emails questioning my mental stability, inquiries disguised as concern, subtle attempts to paint me as unreliable. He's trying to control the narrative, Nathaniel explained. He always does, I said. The next morning, it escalated. A formal letter arrived, stamped and urgent. My father had filed an emergency motion requesting temporary custody of my son, citing abandonment, instability, and lack of support. I stared at the document, my hands steady despite the weight of it. He wants leverage, I said softly. Yes, Nathaniel confirmed. And he believes the court will side with him. He's counting on old assumptions, I murmured, that I'll be too afraid to fight. Nathaniel looked at me carefully. Are you? I looked down at my son, asleep in his bassinet, his tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. No, I said. I'm tired of surviving. I want to protect. The legal team moved quickly. Statements were prepared, medical records compiled, witnesses identified. Every detail of that night in the snow documented with clinical precision. As the evidence came together, I felt something unexpected. Not rage, not triumph, but grief. Grief for the child I had been, who had spent years believing she was the problem. That night, I held my son close and whispered truths I was still learning to believe myself. You are not a bargaining chip, I told him. You are not leverage. You are loved. The custody hearing was scheduled for 48 hours later. The night before it, I stood alone on the balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly below. Snow had begun to fall again, soft and quiet this time, nothing like the storm that had nearly taken everything from me. Nathaniel joined me, hands in his coat pockets. Tomorrow will be difficult. I know, I said, but it will also be clarifying, he added. I nodded. He'll lie. Yes. And they might believe him. Possibly, Nathaniel said. At first, I turned to him. When do I stop hiding? He studied me for a long moment. When hiding no longer serves your safety. I looked back at the snow, each flake drifting down without force, without malice. Just motion. I don't want revenge, I said. I just want the truth to stand. Nathaniel's voice was quiet. Truth has weight. Once it lands, it changes everything. Inside, my son stirred, a small sound pulling me back from my thoughts. I went to him immediately, lifting him gently, feeling his warmth seep into me. They don't know who I am, I whispered into his hair. They think I'm still the girl they could push outside and forget. He shifted against me, secure, trusting. Tomorrow, I would walk into a courtroom not as a daughter asking for mercy, but as a mother demanding protection. And my father would finally learn what happens when the person you tried to erase becomes the one standing between you and everything you need. The courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant, a sterile mix that made my stomach tighten the moment I stepped inside. I adjusted my grip on my son, his small body warm against my chest, completely unaware that strangers were about to argue over his future, as if he were an asset instead of a human being. His breath puffed softly against my collarbone, steady and trusting, and I drew strength from that rhythm as I followed Nathaniel down the long corridor. My father was already there. He sat at the petitioner's table with Meredith beside him, her posture immaculate, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She wore a pale gray suit, carefully chosen to project composure and innocence. My father looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. When he saw me, something sharp crossed his face, surprise mixed with irritation. He hadn't expected me to show up. That realization alone steadied me. We took our seats opposite them. Nathaniel leaned in close, his voice low. Remember, he said, you don't have to prove who you are. They have to prove their claims. I nodded, even though my pulse was loud in my ears. The judge entered, an older man with a stern expression and tired eyes. He wasted no time with pleasantries. This was an emergency hearing, and everyone in the room knew it. Mr. Carter, the judge began, addressing my father, you've petitioned for temporary custody of your grandchild. State your grounds. My father rose, smoothing his jacket with shaking hands. Your Honor, he said, voice practiced, my daughter abandoned her newborn shortly after birth. She disappeared without notice, leaving the child in a dangerous situation. We are deeply concerned for his safety. Meredith dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, a performance so familiar it almost made me nauseous. The judge turned to her. Mrs. Carter? She nodded solemnly. We tried to help her. We offered stability, a home. But she refused. She's always been unpredictable. Unpredictable. The word echoed through me, dragging up years of being labeled difficult, emotional, ungrateful. I focused on my son instead, feeling the weight of him anchor me in the present. The judge turned toward me. Ms. Harper, he said, using the name on the file, not yet aware of what it meant. What is your response? I stood slowly, careful not to disturb my son. My legs felt steady beneath me even as my heart raced. I did not abandon my child, I said clearly. I was forced out of my father's home in the middle of a snowstorm 2 days after giving birth. My surgical incision reopened. My son and I were locked outside. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My father scoffed. That's not what happened. The judge raised a hand. You'll have your turn. Nathaniel stepped forward, placing a stack of documents on the judge's desk. Your Honor, we have medical records from the emergency room documenting hypothermia in both mother and child, as well as trauma consistent with a fall and prolonged exposure to freezing temperatures. The judge flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. Meredith leaned forward abruptly. She's exaggerating, she said. She left because she didn't want to cooperate with reasonable family arrangements. Arrangements? The judge asked sharply. My father cleared his throat. Temporary custody. So she could recover. She refused. I felt something inside me harden. I refused to sign papers I wasn't allowed to read, I said. Papers that would have given them control over my child. The judge's gaze snapped back to my father. Is that true? He hesitated. Meredith squeezed his arm. We were only trying to help, my father said weakly. Nathaniel spoke again. Your Honor, we also have audio evidence from a neighbor's security system. The courtroom went still. Nathaniel pressed a button on his tablet. The sound filled the room, clear and unmistakable. My father's voice, cold and impatient. Meredith's voice, sharp and dismissive. And then the sound that still haunted my sleep, the lock clicking. Meredith's face drained of color. My father surged to his feet. That's taken out of context. Sit down, the judge snapped. The audio ended. Silence hung heavy in the room. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression no longer neutral. Mr. Carter, he said slowly, is there any reason you did not mention this incident in your petition? My father's mouth opened, then closed. Words failed him. Meredith tried again. Your Honor, emotions were high. No one intended harm. The judge's voice hardened. Intent is not required for negligence. I felt tears prick at my eyes, not from fear, but from release. For the first time, the truth wasn't being dismissed. Nathaniel continued. Additionally, Ms. Harper has full-time medical support, stable housing, and documented care for her child. There is no evidence to support claims of abandonment or instability. The judge nodded slowly. I see. He looked directly at my father. This court does not take lightly false petitions, especially those involving vulnerable children. My father's shoulders slumped. I am denying the request for temporary custody, the judge said firmly. Furthermore, I am issuing an order prohibiting unsupervised contact with the child pending further review. Meredith gasped. You can't do that. I just did, the judge replied. My breath left me in a rush I hadn't realized I was holding. I sank back into my chair, clutching my son as relief washed through me in waves. The judge banged his gavel. This hearing is concluded. As people began to stand, my father turned toward me, his face twisted with anger and something that looked like fear. You think this is over, he hissed under his breath. You're making powerful enemies. I met his gaze calmly. You made them when you chose control over compassion. Meredith grabbed his arm, pulling him back as court officers stepped closer. Outside, the cold air hit my face, sharp but clean. Snowflakes drifted down gently, nothing like the storm that had nearly taken everything from me. Nathaniel walked beside me in silence until we reached the car. "You did well," he said finally. "I didn't do it alone," I replied, looking down at my son. "No," Nathaniel agreed. "You didn't." As the car pulled away from the courthouse, I watched my father and Meredith standing on the steps, small figures against the imposing stone building. For years, that man had seemed larger than life, his authority absolute. Now he looked like what he was, just another person facing consequences. I rested my hand over my son's back, feeling his warmth, his life. "They tried to erase us," I whispered, "but we're still here." The city stretched ahead of us, vast and uncertain, but for the first time I wasn't afraid of what waited beyond the horizon. I was ready. The silence after the hearing felt heavier than the courtroom itself. It followed me back into the car, wrapped around the drive through the city, and lingered even after the doors of the residence closed behind us. It wasn't the silence of peace yet. It was the silence of something holding its breath. My son slept through most of it, his small chest rising and falling against mine, blissfully unaware that the world had just tried and failed to take him away from me. I carried him inside slowly, every step deliberate, as if moving too fast might shatter the fragile sense of control I was still learning to trust. Nathaniel stayed behind after escorting us in. "You should rest," he said gently. "But don't be surprised if they don't." "Rest?" I echoed faintly. "They," he clarified. "Your father and his wife. People like them don't accept boundaries quietly." He was right. The first sign came less than 2 hours later. A message request appeared on my phone from a name I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw the profile picture. Meredith. Her hair perfectly styled, her smile wide and artificial, frozen in a photo that felt like a warning more than an invitation. I didn't open it. Another followed. Then another. Nathaniel noticed the tension in my shoulders. "She's reaching out?" I nodded. "Don't respond," he said. "Not yet." I placed my phone face down on the table and focused on my son, rocking him gently as he stirred. "She's never reached out to me directly before," I murmured. "She always spoke through my father." "That's because she thought she didn't need to," Nathaniel replied. "Now she's improvising." That night, the news cycle picked up the story. Not the full truth, not yet, but whispers. An emergency custody petition denied. A family dispute involving a newborn. Speculation wrapped in vague language. I watched the headlines scroll across the muted television screen while my son slept in his bassinet nearby. "They're testing public sympathy," Nathaniel said, trying to frame themselves as concerned grandparents. "And me?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "As unstable, disappearing, uncooperative." The words should have hurt. Once they would have. But something had shifted inside me. "I don't want to fight them in public," I said quietly. "I don't want my son growing up as a headline." Nathaniel nodded. "Which is why we won't react. We'll respond." The difference mattered. The next morning, Elaine arrived earlier than usual. She carried no folders this time, no screens or charts. Just a quiet intensity that told me this session would be different. "Today," she said once we were seated, "we talk about visibility." I adjusted my son in the carrier, his small hand curling around my finger. "I'm not sure I want it." "That's the point," Elaine replied. "Power seeks you whether you want it or not. The question is how you shape it." She pulled up a single document on the screen. A partnership overview. I recognized the logo immediately. The firm my father had been courting so desperately. "They're nervous," Elaine said. "Not because of the hearing, because of you." I frowned. "They don't even know who I am." "They know someone intervened," she said. "Someone with resources, discretion, and influence." "And that scares them?" "It intrigues them," Elaine corrected, "which is far more dangerous." Nathaniel stepped in. "They've requested a private briefing," Not with your father, with us. With me? I asked. With the entity, he said carefully. They still don't know the connection. My pulse quickened. So they're willing to listen? Yes, Elaine said, but only if they believe they're dealing with strength. I thought of my father's face in the courtroom when the judge denied his petition. The way control had slipped through his fingers in real time. What happens if they find out who I am? I asked. Elaine studied me. Then the narrative changes, permanently. That afternoon, Meredith escalated. This time, it wasn't messages. It was an appearance. Security alerted us the moment she stepped onto the property. I was in the nursery, humming softly to my son as I changed him, when Nathaniel appeared.